Hello, everyone, and welcome to Flourish Focus, a series where we have one on one conversations with founders and entrepreneurs from across the world. We dig into their business, but also talk about their entrepreneurial journeys. I'm Ameya Upadhyay. I'm a venture partner at Flourish Ventures. We're a fintech focused venture fund with a purpose, and that purpose is furthering financial health and creating a fairer financial system. We do that by backing entrepreneurs that aim to demonstrate a better or a new way of doing business. And via that demonstration, we hope to influence the performance of an entire sector. Talking about founders that are creating better ways of doing business, I am really excited to welcome Obi to our this conversation today. Obi is the CEO and founder of Zone. Obi, welcome. It's so great to have you today.
It's a pleasure and always a pleasure to be with you.
Okay, Obi, let's dig into this conversation straight away. And I think the question top of mind for our audience would be, what is Zone? What problem does it solve? What does it do? So explain it to our audience in the simplest way possible.
Okay, well, fantastic. Yeah, so basically, for payments to happen between financial institutions, there has to be a network that connects the financial institutions together. What Zone does is allow that network connect financial institutions, as I said, but without an intermediary, all through blockchain. Banks, fintechs can collaborate through the Zone network to be able to either process domestic payments initially, and then ultimately regional and also international payments as well. So in a nutshell, that's what Zone is about.
Okay, Obi, I heard you say that term blockchain. And as soon as people hear blockchain, they're thinking crypto, Bitcoin, investments. How does blockchain feature into this payment network that you talked about?
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. So the initial implementation of blockchain in financial services has been in the world of crypto, somewhat quite separate from traditional financial services, traditional banks, and so on, and mostly not regulated. What we've done on Zone is to take the power of the technology powering crypto and try to blend it with the legitimacy and the compliance associated with the traditional financial industry. And in so doing, provide the comfort for the big and sort of established players in financial services to be able to adopt. And so one big thing that is different is, for example, Zone is regulated and licensed by the central bank in Nigeria. Because of that, we have participation of traditional, large established financial institutions in Africa. And then Zone is fully compliant as well, and expecting to evolve and scale that way, because that's how we believe blockchain would become, will gain the level of mainstream adoption that it deserves.
Right. So I hear you making a distinction between crypto, which is the currencies that reside on top of blockchain, and the blockchain technology itself. Right, Obi?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So yes, there's a big difference. So even within the blockchain infrastructure, one big difference on Zone is that it's permissioned. So it's not public and open in the same way the crypto blockchains would be. Um, and then we seek to address some of the loopholes with the traditional crypto implementation of blockchain. So, for example, like counterparty risk on tokens, um, you know, um, capital controls, exchange controls, and generally regulatory rules that ensure that regulators are comfortable to allow financial institutions participate in such a system.
Excellent. So I hear that it's a blockchain, but it's fully regulated by the central bank, and access to this blockchain is restricted to parties that are also regulated. Obi.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay, that is excellent. I think folks who know the payment infrastructure in Nigeria a little bit will have this question in their mind. Why do we need another switch? There is NIBS, there is InterSwitch, unified payments. Why are you guys trying to create something for which solutions already exist?
Absolutely, good question. And I'd always commend the existing switches because the payment domain has opened up because of all of the hard work they've done over, say, a couple of decades. However, there's still been significant gaps in the outcome. So, for example, reliability. The central nature of the networks that exist with the switches today makes it such that once the central sort of intermediary is unavailable, the entire network is unavailable. And that affects the experience from a reliability point of view. But there's also issues around reconciliation. So concepts around chargebacks and how the concept of chargeback uh, impacts the trust in the system. There are challenges with fraud, chargeback fraud. So people take advantage of the lack of transparency to try to defraud the system by claim false chargebacks. And then there's settlement. Low merchants want to have access to their money once they accept payments as quickly as possible, not 24 hours or 48 hours later. So while there's massive progress in setting up the infrastructure and enabling digital payments, these gaps plague the environment. And so Zone has come in to essentially close out those gaps to maximize adoption, improve
Yeah.
trust in the system, and just help us aspire and achieve the true cashless society that we are focusing on.
Right. So there are issues with transaction success rates. That's the first thing you said. Dispute and reconciliation leading to fraud, and finally settlement. So, Obi, how does a blockchain technology, in the simplest terms possible, how does a blockchain technology help solve these issues? What is the key innovation that Zone has made that helps solve these issues?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. So for reliability, the the secret sauce is that the failure point, the
Hmm.
central failure point, is no longer there because on Zone, we allow sender bank and receiver bank to communicate directly with each
Okay.
other.
Yeah.
Yes, and the banks communicate directly, or fintechs communicate directly with each other without relying on this intermediary system that may or may not be available. So reliability or success rates go up significantly. Now, in terms of disputes and chargebacks, the transparency that blockchain provides, meaning that the sender bank and receiver bank have access to the exact same records, allows reconciliation happen instantly and in real time, so that where there's a need for customers to resolve chargebacks and get a refund, rather than wait days or weeks, this can happen in a minute or two. Now, for settlement, um, what we are doing on Zone is what has delayed settlement before today is that the transaction processing systems are separate from the settlement system. And so what you have to do is that you transfer information from the transaction processing system at intervals to the settlement system in order for value to be delivered. But what we are doing on Zone is that the same blockchain becomes the transaction processing and the settlement system at the same time, so that settlement can happen for each transaction based on a regulated token. And so merchants can get value same day, and in certain cases, as we're working towards, almost instantly. Yeah, so these are like the way we've applied the innovative features on blockchain to solve those problems.
Right. It's like every participant in this payment ecosystem is connected to an infrastructure where everyone can see what's happening real time. And that reduces a lot of issues immediately. And Obi, I just want to point out here that this is the key innovation that we, Flourish Ventures, also invested behind in Zone. And as part of our diligence, we talked to most of the top bankers in Nigeria. And the one thing that I heard all of them say repeatedly is this problem of a central intermediary, right, which affects the reliability and the transaction success rates that you talked about. And here I want to make it clear to the audience that Zone is not replacing one central intermediary to become another, right, Obi?
Absolutely, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Our view, even more into the future, is that overall, the decentralized approach to payment is the more long-term, more sustainable, and the sort of evolutionary path. Um, and yes, and I'll probably talk about that later. But overall, it's a different paradigm. Basically, it's a paradigm that gives control um, in transaction processing to the participants on the network, as opposed to concentrating that power and control in a central intermediary.
No, let's talk about that, Obi. I think I'm very interested in how you see the payment infrastructure overall, even outside Zone, evolve over, let's say, 15, 20 years. So gaze into that crystal ball and tell me what you see.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, segueing from the last question, um, I like to use email architecture as an example, as an analogy. Today, email services are decentralized. So you have an email user with Gmail and an email user with, say, Yahoo, and the user instructs his email provider Gmail to send an email to a user who's on Gmail. To a user who's on Yahoo, for example, and that flow of information is decentralized, right? It's direct. And this would happen across various email service providers, whether it's Hotmail or Yahoo or Outlook or email or Gmail. Now, our vision for the next 10, 15, 20 years is that payment becomes like that. So not just is it decentralized, but if you look at the email, it's also frictionless, right? It
Mm.
works well, it's borderless, so it's not restricted by geographical borders, and it's instant. We think that payment would evolve into this decentralized structure, but also be frictionless, borderless, and instant, except compliant with regulations and overseen by the regulator. We also know that where email is powered by the traditional email protocols, SMTP and POP3 and so on, payments will be powered by blockchain protocols instead. And then where email is exchanging text on the payment side, it's value that is exchanged. So it's a strong analogy
Yeah.
that happen. And that's how we think this would evolve into a global scale of adoption and also form a foundation on top of which other financial services beyond payment can be built in a decentralized way.
So, Obi, I love that analogy, except that there's no central bank regulating emails. And so I love this vision, but how does this, isn't there a tension between having autonomous, decentralized payments initiated by payment participants and a central bank or a government that legitimately wants to have its eyes on the payment infrastructure?
Absolutely. So we blend both. So the vision for
Mm.
Zone is both of them. And how do I mean? Today, the government and the regulators, the way they regulate today is that they write those regulations down on
Mhm.
paper
Yeah.
and they audit at intervals to enforce quarterly, annually. On blockchain affords the capability for those regulatory rules to be written into the blockchain, actually,
Hmm.
and enforced on the blockchain as filters for transactions,
Okay.
right? In that way, it's a more effective kind of automated way to enforce the behavior on the blockchain for anybody who is using that blockchain, while also providing radical level of transparency for the regulators. So
Can you give
that's
it?
it's of both worlds, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great. Then that would also reduce the bandwidth and the resources a central bank would have to spend on supervision because it's native.
Absolutely. It's
Can you
like
give
auto vision. Yeah.
can you give us an example, Obi, of what that might be?
A good example would be um, so capital exchange control rules, right? Many countries, especially developing countries, are wary about capital flight, right? Um, so they try to limit, especially outward flows, right? With velocity limits, transaction limits, and so on. Those things are baked into the regulation, and they're on paper, and so the government, the regulators have to audit the money transfer operators to see that they are abiding by those regulations, which they sometimes don't, because it's especially beneficial not to. On a regulated blockchain for payment, through which the money transfer operators are initiating those transfers, there just will be no choice, right? I mean, the rule, the limit or velocity limit or transaction limit is baked in as filter for transactions. So any transaction that does not meet the criteria will not even go through in the first place. And while all of this, there's complete oversight, as opposed to having to do a separate audit into different systems. There's full trusted, like a single source of truth for the regulator to see what is going on. Yeah, so that's one very typical example of blending decentralization with regulation. That's the way we look at it.
Right, right. Obi, that makes a lot of sense. And in fact, that would also reduce allegations of favoritism and all of that that central banks regularly face if these rules were baked into a system that was operational. Now, you have interacted with the Central Bank of Nigeria very closely, and you have a full switching license, Obi. And so, for all the founders who, especially fintech founders who are listening to this conversation, how have you managed that relationship? Because so many, let's be honest here, so many struggle to have a constructive conversation with the central bank. And sometimes the the bank can seem idiosyncratic.
Yeah,
So I'd love for you to talk about that relationship a bit and to give any advice that you might have to founders who are listening to this conversation.
yeah, that's a good one. Our observations are sort of straightforward with the regulators. Regulators want as little risk as possible. Um, but but they want to service the industry. They want the industry to function at an optimal level with as limited risk as possible. And so they like innovation, but with zero risk. It's an interesting. Um, uh, as we know, innovation comes with risk. Anyway, but the way understanding this, the way we've gone about it is, I think the first thing is having a track record um, that is quite clean and without any history of uh, any violations or anything that could create skepticism, right? I think has been helpful for us. I think regulators look out for that because it's their way of assessing. It's the same way a bank would assess a debtor, right, in terms of their likelihood to pay back. I think regulators do that, maybe not with a formal process, but they are looking out to say, okay, who is more trustworthy amongst the players and so on. So I think that's a big thing. The second thing, obviously, to complement that is ensuring to abide or comply with regulations so that it kind of reinforces that low risk status that where you want to be. And then finally, I see that regulators love players who are innovating to enable the system. I think they are still very invested in that. And we have also benefited from that, especially when it's innovation that is clear to bring efficiencies, to bring improvements in a customer experience. So a combination of those three, and then good engagement, especially in new areas like with blockchain, that help to carry the regulator along in understanding the nuances of the technology and kind of separating concerns. For in our case, for example, we had to be clear that what we are doing is blockchain, which is the underlying technology, and not crypto.
Right.
Yeah, those types of engagements have been quite helpful.
That's very useful, Obi. And I wanted to take a moment to talk about Zone's traction. Of course, a young company, but can you talk a little bit about who are your customers and how have things gone over the last 1 year?
Yeah. Great stuff. We started off initially with banks because we launched with a use case on the ATM device, our ATM cash withdrawal use case. So we facilitated cash withdrawals by one bank customer from another bank's ATM on the blockchain. Because of that, basically that was our pilot. But because of that, we kind of temporarily excluded fintechs because fintechs don't deploy ATMs. And the pilot went fantastically well, lots of learnings. Out of those learnings, we basically built out the second version of the network, which is even much better in terms of throughput, in terms of response times, in terms of functionality, and so on. Now, having done that, we have just recently launched our second use case, which is for point of sale at merchant locations and agent locations. Now, this has opened up the opportunity to go beyond just the banks and begin to deal with the fintech. So right now, as we speak, we've onboarded quite a number of fintechs who deploy POS terminals, some of the big names, while also plugging in bank POS terminals as well. We have 9 banks, which include 4 of the top 5 banks who are live on our network right now. And we're expanding. We expect that we will be, especially with the POS, we expect to see some significant acceleration in our expansion.
Yeah, I just want to be clear to the audience that 4 of the top 5 banks are already on the network. This is not a pilot. They are live. Transactions are going through. This is not proof of a concept.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Obi, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about your journey as a founder, as a human being, as a husband and a father. And you've been a veteran of this industry. You're a repeat founder, and you were the founder and CEO of AppZone, which I'm sure many of our audience also knows. So can you talk a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey, and especially what lessons have the challenges brought to you? What would you say to young founders who are just starting off? Just double click that a little bit for us.
Okay, yes. So I think my biggest lesson would obviously be the idea around focus.
Hmm.
Uh, when we started AppZone, we've been super excited about building, like engineering new products and just like enabling the financial services industry. And that kind of led to a lot of innovation. I think we've also been traditionally innovative in AppZone. And so lots of ideas, lots of initiatives. But then I realized that, especially when you're starting and resources are limited, that type of diversification can be quite dissipating and it can affect traction. So while it seems exciting, you don't make as much progress across all of them as you'd love to. So that I would say is the biggest lesson. We've obviously restructured and kind of adopted a different model now. that allows us to focus on where we think the biggest bang for our buck is, and make a lot of traction in that area. We've also learned a lot about culture.
Hmm.
Um, we've always been particular about culture even in AppZone,
Yeah.
but how the how to really create um, the right type of culture is something I think um, that we've learned, and I think we are doing a lot better now. Yes,
Talk
so I think
more Talk
yes.
more about that how, Obi. People are now you've raised everyone's curiosity. Just give us one or two things on how you are trying to inculcate that culture.
Yeah, so I think there's a it's all about looking at what the modern workforce wants and how the workforce kind of views life, right? As opposed to when I was just out of school and all of that. I think there's a huge focus on development, a huge focus on development, uh, like growth, helping grow. There's a huge focus on the nature of a lot more positive engagement in the environment, like ensuring that the engagements interactions are quite positive, even when the conversation has to be tough, right? Framing those tough in a positive way. So a huge focus on a human-centric view, right? That at the same time does not compromise the high performance expectations. So a blend, standing on a thin line between high performance and human centric attitude. I think this is like really really very critical. Again, I think just the fun factor as well. Creating an environment where the team can feel like, look, we're having fun as well. We are overperforming, but we're also having fun in little ways that ordinarily in the past I would think wouldn't matter. But now I know those actually do matter. Yes, beyond just getting the results. Yeah, so there's a number of things that way. That I think communication as well. Communicating the core ideals in as clear and repetitive nature as possible.
Yeah,
I also, yeah, really, really, really a good thing.
that is music to our ears, Obi, because as you know, we have a core belief that resilient founders build successful businesses, and you can't do the second without the first. And talking about this balance between high performance and the human side of the story, how do you balance these two sides? How do you as a family man, as a father and a husband, how do you manage this balance between your high performance culture at work and the need to have these other aspects of life taken care of?
First of all, I must admit that I've not balanced it very, very well. But but of course, lots of efforts to try to do that. I mean, first of all, I think I'm fortunate to have a wife and kids, a family that is quite understanding. Sometimes I think too understanding, you know, um, but then what I try to do is to forget as many special occasion, any special occasion at all, as an opportunity to kind of hang out with the family. And I mean, like go out and sort of spend some time. Um, so there are multiple locations. So it could be personal birthdays, it could be religious holidays, or it could be other forms of holidays, family, other extended family occasions. And so trying to make a point to spend that time, and actually it's quality as well, so trying to make that time um quality time, very strong engagement, very positive. I also try to, when I engage with the kids, I also try to sort of mentor them, like teach them directly. Like I assume, look, these kids are adults, um, and I'm going to guide them the way I would like a team member, and it does work. You'd be surprised how much they understand, when you're really direct and try to sort of just rationalize the things that they should know, as opposed to imposing them. So I see myself as a salesman in that sense, right? When it comes to grooming the kids and all that, I try to sell all those ideas and show how and why um, those things make sense. And because naturally I'm a salesman, naturally, so it helps. Um, but yeah, so those are some of the things. Trying to make more time to spend with the wife as well, on like sort of like one-on-one getaways, like that. I try to see how I can pull out time for that. So I'm not anywhere near where I should be in having that balance, but I'm on that journey.
It's a work in progress, Obi, but wise words there. Thank you so much. And listen, thank you so much for this conversation. It was wonderful, it was wide ranging, and I'm sure folks listening to this would find it super useful. So thank you, Obi.
Yes, thanks so much. It was a pleasure and it was much fun.
And thank you all so much for joining us today. For any questions regarding today's discussions, Flourish Ventures, or our portfolio companies, please email us at events@flourishventures.com. Look forward to seeing you next time.